IGEPHA im Gespräch. Der Podcast der Austrian Self-Care Association.
Hello and welcome to IGEPHA im Gespräch, the podcast brought to you by IGEPHA, the Austrian Self-Care Association. I'm Christina Nageler, the Managing Director of IGEPHA. Self-care is a daily practice for each of us, and research has highlighted its significant role in health economics and the healthcare system, making it an essential component of healthcare. Yet, Austria lacks a national self-care strategy. In this season of our podcast, we are exploring self-care approaches in different countries and continents. Today, our journey takes us to New Zealand, where I'm delighted to introduce our special guest, Scott Milne, the Director of Consumer Healthcare Products Association, New Zealand. Hello, Scott. It's nice to have you here.
Lovely to be with you, Christina. Thank you so much for having me on your wonderful podcast series.
Before we dive into our discussion, let me briefly introduce Scott. Scott Milne serves as the Executive Director of Consumer Healthcare Products New Zealand, the primary industry body in New Zealand representing manufacturers, importers, distributors and retailers of non-prescription medical products, including medical devices, vitamins and minerals, and all over-the-counter items. He holds a Diploma of Pharmacy and Retail Pharmacy from the Central Institute of Technology. Collaborating with CHPNZ, the New Zealand self-care organization, he champions consumer rights to self-care when it comes to over-the-counter medication. I'm eager to learn more about the state of self-care in New Zealand. Scott, the core message encapsulated in New Zealand's health strategy, Future Direction 2016, is quite simple yet profound one. All New Zealanders live healthy, stay healthy, and become healthy. This emphasis goes beyond just enhancing the state of health. It also focuses on well-being, encompassing quality of life and health throughout one's aging process. Can Future Direction 2016 be considered as a form of self-care strategy for New Zealand? What would you say?
Yes, most certainly. I mean, it's a somewhat lofty goal and aspiration, but we regularly quote those words when we're talking with politicians and with leaders in the health industry. It would be nice to be there, as I guess most countries would strive for that sort of goal. However, we're still not there yet. We do have some challenges in our healthcare system, predominantly around money, which is not unusual, but also to a lesser degree, but still very important, around philosophy. I think as an industry, we have struggled a little bit to get the value of self-care and OTC or over-the-counter medications, the real value understood by those in the healthcare sector.
And what strategies and concepts do you have in mind for New Zealand to become more self-care orientated?
Well, we're undergoing some really interesting change at the moment. At the moment, we're regulated by the Medicines Act 1980, right? A 43-year-old piece of legislation which has been amended and added to over those decades. And it is way out of date and no longer fit for purpose. For the last 5 years, we have been trying with government to get a new piece of legislation. And that bill was passed just this year. The Therapeutic Products Bill became the Therapeutic Products Act. But the Therapeutic Products Act will give us the opportunity to reframe how we and how the community see primary health care. So we're quite excited about the opportunity that this new act provides. We will spend the next 2 or 3 years helping government and helping health policymakers form the regulations, which are the mechanics underneath the bill, the day-to-day mechanics of how it will work. And so we have a real opportunity here. But to go back to your question about the nation's healthcare strategy, I think we take self-care for granted in New Zealand. The availability of over-the-counter medicines has always been broad. We have general sale. In other words, you can buy paracetamol in small quantities from a petrol station or a variety store in very small quantities. And of course, we have an extensive chain of pharmacies across the nation with a greater regulation of medicines there. And then, of course, we have pharmacist-only medicines. That is a category where the pharmacist must diagnose and speak with the patient and record special details. And then, of course, prescription medicines. So integrating self-care into that framework is a challenge. And in particular, making New Zealanders and health policy writers understand that there is another element to self-care, which is healthcare literacy and also personal responsibility. Bit of a long-winded answer, I'm sorry.
No, that's very interesting. So actually New Zealand is quite far in availability of self-care, but lacking in health literacy, etc. So how precisely will the New Zealand people then experience the advantages of self-care or a self-care strategy? What will that be?
Well, let's go back to the earlier comment you made just about where we sit globally in the market. New Zealand is a very small market at the end of a very long distribution chain. And one of our challenges is actually getting a regulatory marketplace that is liberal enough or accessible enough for global companies to want to make the effort to come here. And in recent years, well, we've had a change. 7 years ago, New Zealand was regarded as a leader, a global leader in switch. We were leading the way in things like omeprazole, sildenafil, oral contraceptives, antifungals, slow-release paracetamols. You know, we were very innovative and at the leading edge. Now that changed, and we now have a regulator, the same regulator and the same regulations, but being interpreted completely differently. Our regulatory timeframes has stretched out enormously. It's taking years to get products registered. And then, of course, we were a very small, awkward market during COVID, and we've really been bashed around in terms of getting new product onto the market. There has been a lack of innovation because the regulatory framework has been too difficult to work with. And major manufacturers are saying, look, at the moment, New Zealand is too hard. We love you, but it's too hard to do business because there isn't the promise of scale there. So that is our biggest single challenge. And it goes back to my earlier comment about how important this new legislative framework that we have coming will be, because it's a bit of a nexus. It's a tipping point for the New Zealand self-care opportunity. If we cannot get government to understand the value of self-care and to make the regulations not soft, we don't want soft. What we want is predictability and accountability of the regulator. And that's what we'll be working for. If we can get there, then we will see a return of innovative new products coming onto the market. And hopefully we will be back in front of the world for trying out switch. New Zealand is such a fabulous market for manufacturers to trial new innovative products. We have a population of 5 or 6 million. We're an island. We are essentially stable government. There is very little corruption. You know, it's a tidy little microcosm in terms of global markets. So we should have lots of innovators knocking on our door. But at the moment, we're making it too tough because of the regulator.
Coming back to the people, what do you think are their advantages for all these processes going on in New Zealand?
I think like most countries around the world, the consumer or the community will benefit most by having choice. That is both choice of product, but also choice of how they spend their money. It is expensive still to go to a general practitioner in New Zealand, and if we can have good quality self-care products available, we can give people economic choice and also pharmaceutical choice. That's the greatest advantage. It's quite a literate nation. The vast majority can read and write and understand the instructions on a label. So we're well positioned to have people look after themselves. Very early on, I mentioned to you, and I'm sure the case in Austria and all across Europe, healthcare literacy is a major challenge. We are early adopters in New Zealand, particularly of technology. We have a lot of access to computers and iPads and fifth-generation phones with smartphones. So there is a tremendous opportunity for self-care to improve healthcare literacy by giving consumers up-to-date, accurate information, when and where they need it. So in terms of what does the healthcare strategy mean for New Zealand, I keep going back to the opportunity. On one hand, we have secondary and tertiary healthcare becoming more contestable and more expensive. So it opens up the market at the bottom in primary healthcare to let people learn about how they can make themselves better and keep themselves healthier. I just want to touch briefly again on this new bill. The Therapeutic Products Act will, for the first time, bring all aspects of healthcare together. So it is including natural health products. And in the past, natural health products, vitamins and supplements have been regulated differently in a different part of legislation. And they will come under this one bill, as will medical devices. So it is a very comprehensive piece of legislation and it's new territory. But again, it provides us with the opportunity to chart our way forward in the coming years.
Sounds very interesting. From your perspective as a self-care association, which key arguments are most significant for persuading politics to cope with this topic?
Yeah, sure. Money is always the most persuasive argument for politicians. So there is an enormous economic value to us improving our offering in self-care. Consumer Healthcare Products New Zealand commissioned a piece of research some years ago on the economic value of self-care. And although it's 4 or 5 years old now, the principles, the tenets remain unchanged. We could prove how many GP visits we could avert. We could show how much money the government could save by having a well-regulated self-care market. So that is the biggest driver. But also in New Zealand, we're a spread-out country. It's a little country. It's only 5 or 6 million people, but it has the land area of sort of the British Isles or of Japan. And so, we have a lot of isolated, small rural towns. We only have sort of 4 or 5 major city groups. So there are a lot of people not near comprehensive, developed medical services. So the ability for them to look after themselves, both in preventative healthcare and in treatment, is one that is very appealing to both the community and, of course, to government.
And you talked about figures and data. What will be then a success for you?
Well, again, let's go back to the size of our organisation. CHPNZ is a small organisation, so it doesn't have vast resources, but it is possible and likely that we will levy for the first time ever our members in 2024 to do a real piece of work that enables us to implement the Global Self-Care Federation policy toolkit on developing a self-care strategy. So our board at the moment is considering how best to do that, but we think that we will employ some specialist additional help to help me develop a strategy that we can take to government along the lines of the policy, the Global Self-Care Federation policy toolkit on developing a self-care strategy. So that's an exciting future. And of course, we do that at the same time as we're trying to influence the regulator on the regulations to go with this new Therapeutic Products Act.
Sounds very great. Any other steps that you see important that you have to take in New Zealand?
Well, we have an interesting situation. New Zealand's a bicultural country. We have a Māori population, the indigenous population, and there is a growing awareness and a growing acknowledgement of what they call rongo-mai, which is traditional healthcare, mostly based on recipes handed down across hundreds of years, few of them written, most of it by verbal transference. But more and more developed nations are realizing there is something to be said for time-honored traditions. So that's an interesting part of our development as a nation, and also in terms of preventative medicine. COVID has provided a massive lift in the number of people taking immune boosting supplements, and rongo-mai, or traditional medicine, is seen as being an interesting part of that. So that's something that we'll be keeping in mind as we develop a self-care strategy. Another thing that we've mentioned is the greater use of digital. How can manufacturers and how can pharmacists work with new technologies to improve people's health or monitoring of their own health or of their own usage of medicines? And then, of course, going back to improving the regulatory process so that it is easier to get importers or manufacturers or distributors know where they stand in terms of the regulatory process. Those are the things that we'll be looking at.
Well, thank you for sharing these insights into the process made in New Zealand towards maybe a national self-care strategy. Before we conclude, could you share your recommendations for us in Austria? What would you say are the essential factors we should keep in mind when crafting then our own national self-care strategy?
Well, I think we're probably the same. And it's how to build relationship with decision makers and to get their attention, because self-care, it's not always top of mind. It's not brain surgery. It's not cancer treatment. It's very much at sort of the grassroots level. And sometimes we're not seen as irrelevant, but we're seen as, oh yes, we must get round to that. And somewhere along the line, we've got to do better at saying, no, we change that attitude, start with us and work from there. So I think we've got to put ourselves out there as problem solvers and as futurists or people with a real future in terms of creating better healthcare systems, particularly at primary level. So building relationship with politicians and also their staff. We realise that sometimes it's the secretary at the office door that's as important as the member of parliament. So being smarter, being absolutely straight up about what we can and can't do, working closely with other like-minded trade industries. We work very closely, for instance, with Medicines New Zealand, which are the prescription arm of equivalent of CHPNZ. We work closely with MTANs, who are the medical devices trade organisation. So delivering a cooperative effort rather than being splintered, rather than trying to have all the focus on just self-care, it's integrating self-care into the broader primary healthcare model. These are the things we're trying to do, and probably I think they apply across the globe.
Many thanks, Scott, for your insights and also efforts to build up the self-care landscape in New Zealand. Thanks for your time and the interview.
It's a pleasure. Lovely being with you, and you're very welcome in New Zealand anytime. We'd love to see you down here, Christina.
To our audience, I hope you found these discussions enlightening. We eagerly anticipate continuing the dialogue about an Austrian self-care strategy. Should you wish to contribute your thoughts, please don't hesitate to contact us via email at office@igepha.at or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Your interest and commitment are greatly appreciated. We will be back soon with the next episode in our ongoing IGEPHA podcast season. Thanks for listening.